This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Welcome to the OI podcast, the Otago Institute podcast, in-depth conversations with experts from the worlds of arts, sciences and mataranga Māori, brought to you by the Otago Institute, the Otago branch of the Royal Society for Arts and Sciences. Kia ora, I'm Dr Barb and I am here. Oh my goodness, what a show we have got for you today. But first, I have got some exciting things to let you in on. We have a in real life live people seminar at the Barclay Theatre, Tuhura, Otago Museum from 4 till 6. Now, it's only an hour long, but we have the room booked from 4 till 6 because there is going to be amazing platters from Inspired Pantry. So it is Wednesday the 25th of June and be there at 4 o'clock. It's going to be amazing. The Royal Society of Te Aoparangi and the Otago Institutes for Arts and Sciences, us, the Otago branch, are proud to present these talks by two inspiring scientists who have recently won the Prime Minister's Science Awards. This will be an evening of compelling science, fresh ideas and powerful storytelling by Professor Geoghegan and Dr Olivia Harrison, where they share insights about their research. This is free, but we're asking people to please book a ticket because space is limited. And, of course, there are those amazing platters there, which the Royal Society, thank you very much, are putting on. Again, it's the Barclay Theatre, Tuhura, Otago Museum from 4 till 6 p.m, Wednesday the 25th of June. And today we are super lucky because we have Dr Olivia Harrison here in the studio with us. Welcome, Olivia. Thank you for coming along to the studio to tell us all about you and your science. Now, what we are not going to do is we're not going to do spoilers about your actual talk. Do you think we can do that?
Yeah, we can try.
Yeah, I reckon we can. Anyway, I'm going to give you a little bit of background. It's just the blurb, basically, for the talks, but it's a bit of background into Dr. Olivia here. So you did a BSc in neuroscience and a B.Phed honours in exercise physiology here at the University of Otago, and then you went over to the UK, to Oxford, to do a DPhil, and I believe you're a Rutherford Discovery Fellow as well, and now an emerging scientist. Oh my goodness, so much. So what your talk is about is anxiety. Oh my goodness. Multidisciplinary approach to understanding and managing anxiety. Should I tell a little bit about anxiety? I've got a blurb here. Anxiety is a very common mental health condition globally and in New Zealand. It can become incredibly debilitating and destructive. Many of the symptoms of anxiety are perceived as physical sensations in the body, e.g. a racing heart or hotness of breath. Dr. Harrison has studied how misinterpretations of signals between the brain and body can exacerbate the symptoms of anxiety. Olivia and her team use techniques from neuroscience, physiology, psychology, exercise science and computational modelling to better understand this breakdown in communication. Do you do all of those things, Olivia?
Yeah, in parts, yep.
Wow, that's kind of like, they're so different, aren't they? Like computational modelling, exercise science, neuroscience, like they're really different disciplines.
Yeah, it's really fun.
Yeah, crazy. They are also, your team are also evaluating the effectiveness of medication and exercise in different individuals. So is that like comparing medication versus exercise or both of them together?
No, not comparing. They're separate studies. They're sort of different population groups.
Oh, right, okay. With the aim of identifying biomarkers and developing personalised strategies that will help each individual to tune in to their symptoms and find ways to manage anxiety. My goodness, that just sounds like an amazing amount of work and you must have quite a big team working there together.
I do. I average somewhere between 20 to 25 postgraduate students and then a couple of employees as well.
That is quite amazing.
Yeah, it's busy.
And how do you evaluate anxiety?
There are lots of ways we can evaluate anxiety. Often it's self-report.
Right. So people say, oh, look, I'm feeling like I'm out of breath.
Yeah. It's self-report of their thoughts and their body. And then we also have some objective measures of their body as well that we do in the lab. So we check how they can perceive signals from their body and see how that relates to what they're reporting to us.
Right. So you can see if their heart's racing or if they're breathing faster, or does your temperature you know when you feel hot, does your temperature actually go up?
Probably a little bit. Sometimes it's more core temperature though, so you'd feel more things like sweating or as a result of that.
Right.
So
and can you measure sweating?
We don't, but you can.
Wow, how do you measure sweating?
Well, you probably measure conductance in the skin, so you'd see how much it changes. Yep.
Yes, so it's just like when you've got damp in your walls.
Yeah, exactly.
You just measure conductance of That makes total sense. But so what physical type things are you actually measuring, like your objective measures?
We focus mainly on breathing.
Right.
We do have lots of physiological measures. So we measure heart rate, we measure heart rate variability, so how much your heartbeats change from beat to beat.
That's the HRV on your watch,
That's the
isn't
HRV,
it?
exactly.
Wow.
It's a really common measure now, and it's a really, really good indicator of your level of stress.
Wow.
I'm
I'm going to come back to that and ask you all about HRV. I've got lots of questions about HRV. Carry on.
So we measure those, and then and resting breathing as well, how fast you're breathing, how deep you're breathing, how much that matches your physiology. So when you're sitting, resting, or you're doing exercise, your body uses up oxygen and produces carbon dioxide.
Right.
So we can measure how much of the carbon dioxide you're breathing out and how much oxygen you're breathing in.
Right.
And see whether or not it's matching what your body actually needs, or whether you're over or under breathing as well.
Over or under breathing? So when you're over breathing, does that mean you're breathing too fast?
Too fast, yeah. Or too slow.
Or too slow.
Yeah, so over breathing too fast, under breathing too slow.
Under breathing too
and
slow.
And both very, very common sort of physiological processes that happen with anxiety.
Because people say take a deep breath, don't they? Mm-hmm. And that would be over or under breathing?
It's basically a reset.
Right.
And it's something your body's trying to do anyway. If you're really stressed, you might find yourself sighing a lot more, and it's that big like, ugh, and your body's really trying to reset it because you've got out of sync.
Oh, that's interesting, eh? So your body has lots of like kind of ways that you possibly don't even notice that you're doing, but your body's just trying to sort it out.
Yeah, definitely.
Wow, that's quite clever of our bodies, isn't it?
It is.
Kind of like going on autopilot and doing a whole lot of things that they're trying to make things better, but we're not conscious of them.
Yeah, and we can override them as well, and we get into habits to override them. So it might not be as effective as it would like, but it's trying.
Right. Oh, that's quite interesting. Now, I just wanted to clarify about anxiety. When we're talking about anxiety, because a lot of people say, oh, I've got a big test tomorrow and I'm a little bit anxious about it. Is that anxiety?
Yes, but it's good. So Anxiety is actually a full spectrum, and moderate levels of anxiety are a really core emotion. They're important to what we do. If we took away all the anxiety, I don't think this species would survive. Oh. So it's really important.
So elaborate on that. Why wouldn't we survive?
Because
you should be anxious before you do a test.
Exactly. It helps you to motivate.
Right.
But not too anxious. It's always about finding that sweet spot. So if we have no anxiety, then we're probably not motivated to study for that test. We're not motivated to take action. So anxiety is all about thinking about the future and trying to reduce uncertainty.
Right.
So when something's happening and there's a possible future threat, it's really future oriented, then we want to prepare for that as best we can. So having a little bit of worry and anxiety means that we will try and do things to prepare and to remove that uncertainty.
Right.
So we study for our test, we go back through our notes, we check with our friends, we do all those things. Whereas if we didn't have any anxiety about it, we'd be like, it's fine, not worried.
That's right.
I've picked up enough, I've been to all the lectures, that should be enough, and that might not be enough. So
it's about getting that balance right. And another common place is travel, ahead of travel. So you have to have enough anxiety so you actually do have your, your tickets and your passport and everything, you sorted out where you're going to stay, but not so much that you collapse.
Exactly. There's a tipping point, and when it stops becoming helpful, that's when we start to think about it as a clinically significant condition.
Right.
So when it stops us doing things, instead of it helping us to do things, it's stopping us to do what we want, that's when it becomes clinically significant.
Right. Because in the intro I said anxiety is a very common mental health condition globally and in New Zealand. So is the incidence of anxiety more than it used to be? Do we have any data on that?
Yes, it is. We have higher levels of that clinically significant anxiety, definitely.
Right.
So we have higher levels of diagnoses. I think there's a mixture of things that contributes to that. We have both less stigma around it, which is good. Right. So people are talking about it more. And so
people previously, they might have had anxiety, but they just felt so, shamed by society.
Yeah, or it wasn't
that they didn't
identified.
feel comfortable talking to their GP or talking to their family or talking to anyone about it.
Exactly, or maybe the medical practitioners didn't recognise some of those more unusual symptoms that could be related to anxiety. So definitely there's more awareness, which is great.
Yeah.
But there's also, I think, a higher prevalence in general because of, the state of the world and things are different. And I think one of the big things is just that constant bombardment to bad news and our access to it with things like social media.
I was just thinking that because I think that possibly, there's always been bad news. There's always been wars going on. There's always been plagues and people dying and stuff, but we never knew about it.
Exactly.
Like 100 years ago, 200 years ago, possibly more like 200 years ago now. We just didn't know that it was happening. Maybe 6 months later we'd hear about a war in, I don't know, some other random country on the other side of Europe, but yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely much more available now and available to our younger ages as well in that really critical developing period where their brain is just figuring everything out and that real exposure to a lot of bad news and an ability to just go and go and go and keep finding more that can be quite overwhelming.
And I guess there's nothing you can do about most of it as well.
Exactly.
So
it feels very helpless.
Yeah. Does that feed into making anxiety, that sense of not being able to do anything about it?
Yeah, because you can't reduce the uncertainty.
Right.
And so you can't mitigate that. You can't reduce that worry by planning and preparing and doing things that you feel are within your control to help that.
Yeah. And when you say younger people, what sort of age bracket are we talking about?
Well, we're seeing anxiety as young as in kindergarten,
Oh, my goodness.
And
I thought you were going to say teenage, maybe even 12-year-olds there, but kindergarten.
Yeah, you see it really, really early.
Wow.
Again, that's probably a lot to do with the awareness of those symptoms as well and knowing that child is presenting maybe because of those sort of anxious tendencies. But yes, then all the way through school and then in high school, definitely.
Wow. So let's go back. How do you say those symptoms? So how would you think, or my friend or my child or my whoever, how would you spot those symptoms and say, hey, I think maybe we need to do something about this, or maybe...
Yeah, it can be really tricky because it actually looks different in everyone. Some people have lots and lots of racing thoughts and they maybe can't sleep because of that and they're running around in their head. There's a property that's really quite common in anxiety called catastrophizing, so how much we sort of think about one possibility and then think of all the possible consequences that could happen from that possibility. Right. Because that's our brain's way of trying to reduce the uncertainty, but it can be quite unhelpful when it becomes all-consuming. So those sorts of thoughts, it might be also really physical symptoms, so having a really sore tummy, in little children having a sore tummy, or other things that they're constantly needing comfort for because they're trying to, their body's trying to find ways of making that environment really safe for them.
Right.
So yeah, it can look really different in people.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say tummy because why? And it's this thing I guess people talk about gut-mind connection. Are you looking at that? Is that one of the things you do?
We don't look at the tummy, but definitely it is a huge symptom of anxiety for some. I think it's one of my biggest ones. I know when I'm really worried and I'm not hungry anymore and, it's always in my tummy.
Right.
But yeah, it does look different for different people.
It's quite a strange thing, isn't it? And you think, but that mind racing thing, I think a lot of people maybe don't realise that as a symptom of anxiety, because people are just my mind's spinning, and people, we call it overthinking, right? So you're just going thinking and you're thinking around in circles. And I guess the other thing is that kind of black and white thinking, it's either all bad or all good. Is that kind of wrapped up in that?
It can be. For some people, it definitely can be. I think that overthinking is, this is what's difficult. And I think some of the messaging around anxiety has been lost, where it can be helpful. This, thinking and planning and, I know that I can handle 20 to 25 postgraduate students because I can plan and I can think and I can take one step beyond what they're doing and make sure that I'm trying to mitigate, that next step and remove
next
barriers
disaster that they're about to happen and
or just remove barriers so that they have an easier ride and so that we're not held up so they can get their projects done in time. And so I'm thinking like that, and that's the way that my brain works, and that's really helpful. If I didn't have that, I don't think I could do my job.
Right.
So there's some parts of it that are really, really helpful. And it's, like I said, it's not something we want to completely remove.
Yeah.
And it is really tied up in your personality as well. How you're wired can then lead to maybe a predisposition for developing higher levels of anxiety.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we've got sort of a base level of anxiety that we need because that helps us function, and then at some point that just overdrives, I guess. And I guess that, if it's in a toddler, that's clearly not good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some levels of anxiety are helpful. That separation anxiety is one that we see a lot with little children where, they've got a really great...
dogs as
well. And with dogs. But it shows that they've got a really great connection. So it's obviously having a little bit of separation anxiety is really, really normal because that means they've really bonded to their caregivers, that, moving away into a new environment, they're aware that there are possible threats around, they're trying to evaluate the situation. And it's a little bit scary. And they're not just running into the street on a new road that they've never seen before because that looks fun, sort of thing. It can be helpful, but not, when it becomes too much, when it becomes that they can't engage with that new environment at all, that they can't find new ways to be attached to, say, a new caregiver or other things like that. It can be too difficult.
Yeah. Wow. So what do you do? How do you know when it's too much? And then what do you do?
So I'm not a clinical psychologist. So I'm going to preface all of this by saying that nor am I a GP or a clinician. Right. I'm a neuroscientist.
Right. So I guess you're saying then that you would go to your GP.
You would probably go to a professional.
Right. And then they would be able to say, okay, well, I think maybe you've got a bit of anxiety here or not.
Exactly.
And then they sort of and I guess you're looking for when it's kind of, I don't know how to say it, but maladaptive, like when it's gone past the point that it's actually affecting your day-to-day life and what you need to do to be doing, to be happy and to be kind of working around. And at that point you think, okay, well, actually maybe I need some help. And I guess your first stop there is probably the GP.
In New Zealand, that's how we operate it. It's also the step before that that's where we really focus a lot of our work, because the step before that, when you're coping, but you're really maxed out.
So you're at the edge of coping.
Edge. Ideally, we would be intervening there before you fall off, before it becomes too much, before it becomes really debilitating. And that's where a lot of our, own therapies or own identification and awareness of what's going on, lifestyle habits that we can do that can help, that's where those can really come in.
So is that where your research is centred on what you can do yourself to kind of, retain the good parts of anxiety where you're planning and getting ready but not let it overwhelm your life, and that's kind of where you're looking at with these physiological exercise type ideas in the discussion right at the start there we were talking about medication, because I guess now there are medications for anxiety and some of them fairly commonly used, I guess.
Yeah, we do have quite commonly prescribed. The most common medication for anxiety in Aotearoa is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, or an SSRI.
Right.
And that's actually an antidepressant. It's used very commonly for depression, but it also works for anxiety. And often because those two things can come hand in hand, that might be the first port of call that a GP tries.
Right.
So they'll try that if you're really struggling, or they identify that you're struggling, and they think that might be able to help, then that's something that they can offer.
And is that something that you would take regularly, or something you just take when you're about to do something that's anxiety producing?
No, this one's a regular one. This is it's very sort of small doses, and it tries to just sort of recalibrate the system a little bit.
Right. So it's not something that like you would take, you're having a complete meltdown because you're about to do a live speech somewhere in front of 100 people or something.
No, there are other medications for that.
Yeah. So the ones that you're looking at are these SSRIs, yes, is that right?
Exactly, yeah.
Oh, my goodness. So exciting.
Yes.
All of these things. So you're looking at the interaction between these things?
So what we're doing for that study is we're finding people who've been given a diagnosis of anxiety by their doctor and been prescribed an SSRI. And we have a wonderful network of clinicians who help us recruit for that. So if they ask their patient, or if their patient asks them and they'd like some help with their anxiety and they'd like a medication, then they can start on this SSRI. So we catch them ideally beforehand, but in the first week usually of them starting because it's very low acting. It takes a while to ramp up.
Right.
And then we
So you
test them.
sort of take it for a couple of weeks before anything.
Yeah, you won't notice a difference for the first few weeks for sure. You definitely won't. You won't start to feel better until probably sort of 4-ish weeks, depending on the medication. And then we catch them again at least 6 weeks later, usually about 8 weeks later, and we retest them and we see what's changed, who it's worked for, what has it done, and what hasn't it done.
Right. So when you say what's changed, is that when you're doing these like measuring sweat and measuring that?
Yeah.
The breathing and the heart rate and all of those things.
Exactly. We run all of our tests, mainly focus on breathing, and we run a bunch of questionnaires as well. We also do some really classic sort of emotion perception tests. So we bring up faces and you have to detect emotions because with things like anxiety, we see we're a little bit more prone to detecting fear.
Oh,
so
really?
we're a bit more sensitized towards things like fear.
That's interesting. Wow.
Really interesting. So we've got some really cool preliminary results from one of my master's students who's shown that in this cohort of people, when they first come in, they are heightened in their sensitivity towards fear and only fear, none of the other emotions.
Wow. So it's not like they see someone who's sad and they think, oh, no, that person's really sad. They just, I mean, that kind of makes sense in the sense of like a social animal that lives in a herd. If you sense someone else is afraid and you're like uncertain and you're looking around, I mean, that's really like people as herd animals.
Yeah.
And as prey as well.
We are social beings and we rely on our groups.
Yeah, it's interesting, eh? Is there some, talking of groups, is there like an interaction between your social group and like how social you are and how likely you are, how predisposed you are to have anxiety?
That's a really interesting question. We haven't done too much into that. What we see a little bit, and we've got some really preliminary results on this, is that those who tend to really value things like integration and empathy tend to have higher levels of anxiety. Oh. So, but only very loosely. That's not a 1-to-1 ratio. But it's definitely, I think there's this care and this empathy factor that probably contributes. If you're worried about you and your friends and the state of the world, then that's probably going to contribute to a little bit of anxiety.
Because you're worried about more than just yourself. I guess you're worried about, all the other people as well, so then you're more worried about everything. I was kind of thinking, I was hypothesizing in my brain the opposite. I was thinking if you're in a big group, then maybe you feel safer.
Yeah, there's a protective factor for sure for social interactions. That's a really big protective factor for mental health, so anxiety and depression. If you have more social connections, that can really help you with your sense of belonging and feeling safe. And so that can really help. But in terms of those underlying motivators as to what you really value, I think if you really value things like empathy and integration, then there is a higher likelihood that you might be more prone to things like anxiety.
Wow. It is very kind of a tangled kind of thing when it's got these physical things and mental things, and it's all about society but also as the individual and how they are, and it's quite a big field. I can see why you're multidisciplinary.
Yeah.
That totally makes sense. And the computational modelling, where does that come in?
So that's really interesting. That's when I moved from Oxford and over to Switzerland, and we spent 3 years over in a psychiatry lab in Switzerland.
Oh, wow.
And did a lot of skiing. In Zurich, and we went to this fantastic computational psychiatry group. And what
is computational psychiatry?
It's using mathematical models to try and model behaviour. So try and understand why someone acts the way that they do, why they make those choices, and we can try and model that with
like game theory.
Yeah, so they do some and things like reward learning. So for us, what we do is how do you learn about stimuli in your body? Because we're not just reacting to what's happening at the moment. We're reacting to how we feel right now, but we're also anticipating the future, and that's such a big part of anxiety. What's coming up? If I do this, how might I feel? If I do this, how might I feel? Right. How will that change the way that I experience this?
So if I simplify that down too, just for myself to try and understand it, if the puppy touches an electric fence, she's like, ooh, that was really bad.
Yes.
And then she doesn't want to go near that electric fence.
Exactly.
So it's that kind of behavioural learning.
Exactly.
Or I do something, if I stand behind this line in the kitchen, then I get a treat and I really want a treat, and that's great.
Yes, exactly.
And then she'll do it like 3 times, expecting the treat every time. Oh my gosh, she was so good this morning. It was amazing.
Exactly. So we can see those behaviours, and we want to know what drives those behaviours. So is it because we form this very, very strong association between, say, the electric fence and getting a shock, and we can't update that? No matter how many other fences we touch and we don't get an electric shock,
right,
our brain says fence means shock.
Right.
Is it that? Or are there other things going on? Is it that the way that our brain is processing these errors, so when we think we're going to get a shock and we don't get a shock, the way that error is processed is being completely diminished. We just don't, we say, oh, well, that was just random. Right. And then, so we're trying to understand why the brain is acting that way.
Right.
Because those sorts of more mechanistic understandings might lead us to where, say, in the system things are going wrong,
right,
and how we can then better treat that.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I imagine that, like the electric fence thing, mm-hmm. like sometimes that's really useful, right? Because that's a near miss. Like it was so harsh that you, as a little puppy, you can imagine if that was a little bit worse, I could have died. Mm-hmm. And so I never want to touch a fence again in case next time I do die. Mm-hmm. So that's really adaptive, right? So that's like your brain doing things that are like, okay, just stay away from electric fences all the time.
Yeah, but what if it's not an electric fence? What if it's something we have to interact with every day? So what if it is turning right when you're driving? Because once when you turned right, you almost had a car accident and it gave you a real fright. And so now your brain says, well, don't turn right at these lights, especially if you don't have a right arrow.
Don't ever turn right.
Don't ever turn right. Don't ever turn right without an arrow. So now you spend your time planning.
Going left and left and left until you get...
only the places that you've got a right arrow with a green arrow that lets you have full right of way. Oh, and even then it makes you nervous when you go across it. So now when you go out to meet your friends or go out to do something, you have to plan your trajectory and your route there driving so that you don't have any... no green right arrow turns.
Oh, yes.
To do.
Imagine you've got roadworks and a diversion.
Exactly.
Oh, my
how's that going to send you into a spin? How's that mean you're maybe going to not meet up to do that thing you wanted to do or get to that event you wanted to get to? These sorts of things can, while in their essence be very helpful, in their practicalities in our modern world can be unhelpful when they go too far.
That's crazy. I can see that. And are they mostly those sort of negative interactions? Like something's bad happened as opposed to I've done the right thing and I've got a treat for it, and then trying to work out what I need to do to get that treat.
Yes, anxiety is much more about threat detection and future threat detection. So it's more towards that side. And that's what we see in our work is that when we have these body stimuli and we can make associations so that a visual cue means that people know they're going to get, say, a breathing resistance, that when you're more anxious, what your brain is doing is really hyper-focusing on those possible negative outcomes. Right. Even when you're unsure, there might be positive or there might be negative, it might be there, it might not be. Your brain's going, let's prepare in case there is.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And so as part of your work, is it centering around things that people can do themselves without medication? So they're just like those breathing techniques. And I imagine if you do like a rabbit hole dive on the internet, there's a billion apps and suggestions, and some of them useful and some of them not. And it's very hard to trust anything on the internet, and I'm not entirely sure that anybody should trust anything on the internet, but you can go to some sites that have a higher credibility, so kind of they've got a university study behind them, whatever. But I guess what are good things to do if you're kind of not, you're not at the point where you can't ever turn right. Mm-hmm. You don't feel like you need to go to the GP, but you do feel like this is too much. Like I'm on the edge of this being too much. What are things? I mean, is that what your study is looking at?
So we have that clinical study that we talked about with SSRIs, but the other study is looking at exercise. And we've deliberately chosen exercise and not in people who have a clinical diagnosis, people who are just like that, who have maybe identified or we've identified with them that they're quite anxious and that, it's taking up a lot of their time and energy. And so we look at the effect of exercise, not because we don't think it helps. We know exercise helps with anxiety.
Right.
What we're trying to do is understand why it helps, and in particular, how different kind of exercise helps.
How do we know it helps?
Because there's lots of studies that show if you do an intervention for exercise, basically any type of exercise, like high-intensity training, stretching,
just going for
yoga, going for a walk.
So anything will help with anxiety. So if you can't sleep at night, just get up and go for a walk.
If that's productive or helpful, maybe talk to you. I'm not going to give general advice on that.
No, that's a bad example because there's all sorts of other things about that.
Exactly, there's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on there.
So most things, if it's a big enough stimulus, probably maybe once a month is not going to help that much. It has to be a big enough stimulus. So maybe going for a walk every day or every second day, that sort of habit's going to really help. The one thing that we see has mixed findings is swimming, because even though it can be incredibly fantastic, but I think if you force someone to swim and they don't like swimming, that's really not helpful.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, that was a really interesting one. We saw that swimming had really mixed results compared to everything else, basically. Because, it's scary. If you don't like swimming and you're forced into an intervention that has swimming, you're probably not going to get
Did they ask the people beforehand if they like swimming or not?
No, I think it was just a test of whether or not there was an improvement in anxiety with a swimming intervention. I'm like,
right.
Well, you probably wouldn't sign up if you really hated it, but still, that was.
But because people hate running.
I know
heaps of people who hate running. Why wouldn't they get the same result with that? I think people who hated running didn't like running.
Yeah, I think they didn't have. It depends on how they've structured the intervention, and there are lots of walking.
The devil is in the detail.
It is.
That's what research is all about. Is like taking out all those mixed variables and then getting to really what is the thing there. So I think that swimming one needs a follow up. Follow-up research.
We haven't done it. We actually take a really different approach because if you try to find what's the answer, what's the one answer that's going to solve your anxiety
or solve everyone's anxiety all
anxiety.
At once. I mean, that just sounds like
it doesn't exist.
Hiding to nowhere.
It doesn't exist. And you set people up to fail if you do that, because you say, this thing works, and then it might not work for someone. And they go, well, what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
Why doesn't it work for me when it works for everyone else? And that's, I think, what we're really trying to understand and get across, is that everyone looks different with how they present with anxiety. And everyone's
different about different. Yep. They're anxious about different things.
It shows up in their body and their behaviours differently, and the way they're thinking about it. It's different. And so there's not going to be one option that suits everyone. There'll be ones that have higher success rate overall, but there's not one answer.
So you're sort of looking for the commonalities?
We're looking for how you equip people to be able to make those choices. How do you get them to listen in and understand what their body needs so that they can react to that?
Right. So they can figure out what is the best thing for them.
For them, and why they've made those choices. So
that's quite an empowering type of research study.
It's very different. I think the exercise physiologists probably have their head in their hands going, oh God, there's so many variables. But it's really interesting. So our exercise study actually randomizes people into two groups. One, aerobic exercise. So when, things that get your heart rate and your breathing up and make you a little bit sweaty. And one that's a stretching-based exercise. So it's about time away from your stressful day. It's about time with your body, but in a really sort of quietening fashion. You're targeting specific muscles and techniques, but it's about bringing that sort of fight or flight response down.
Right.
So we look at those two, but what we do within them is we give people lots of choice. So we don't prescribe. We give options for if you want to use the treadmill and you want to use the bike or the rowing machine, whichever you prefer. And then in the stretching side, we give a lot of different exercises, and people can choose which ones they want to focus on that day, which order they want to do. We just give them the set time. And so people can then dictate their own intensity. And what we're really finding from those reflective questions that we ask, we have one student doing some qualitative analysis on this as well, is that people are trying to tune in. They're going, okay, well, what do I need today?
When you say qualitative?
That means about what they have interviews with people and ask what they're feeling and ask them to reflect on what's going on, as well as filling in questionnaires, which give us
and then
numbers.
You're sort of categorising their answers somehow.
Exactly.
As opposed to just getting numbers.
Exactly. So we get both.
Yeah.
I'm still learning.
I'm a quantitative ecologist by trade, so I sort of think numbers.
Exactly.
So you want to measure something and then objectively get the numbers. How many plants are here and what number of plants and what size the plant. All
Yeah,
those sorts
and
of
we do
things.
that for sure, but it can be enriched by these sort of reflections as well. Why do people do that, and what are they finding? And so they're really
how are they
thinking about
feeling when
and
they're
how
doing
they're feeling,
it.
and why are they making decisions like that? So often it's about what they've got coming up that day, whether they're sitting down for the rest of the day or whether they've had a really stressful thing that's led up to that and they want to blow off some steam or, and so really seeing them listen in.
And I imagine when you're dealing with like something that's like absolutely about the mind and about how people react to it, like you absolutely have to have both that qualitative and quantitative together, and it's kind of an arbitrary distinction in a way because you're never going to get anywhere with just one or just the other. And that's kind of the whole yes, behind your study, because that's the whole essence of multidisciplinary. And if you've got a physical response that you can measure, but a mind thing that's making it, so you have to know how the people are feeling and thinking. And in the end, if they feel better, then they are better.
Exactly. Because what works is what you'll do and what you'll keep doing.
Yeah.
There's no point in prescribing something or telling someone to do something if they don't like it and they're not going to keep doing it without you at their back. So we want to give people these skills.
In fact, it could make it worse. It could make them anxious that they're not doing it and therefore they're not getting better because they're not doing it, but they can't do it because they're anxious about doing it. Oh
Exactly.
my God. I can imagine you going down an absolute rabbit warren there.
Exactly. So we're trying to give people those skills.
Wow. That's quite impressive.
A different way of doing it.
Yeah. Hey, now I want to get back to my clever watch. So I had a medical event 18 months ago now, and my husband bought me this watch, which is absolutely cool. So it measures this HRV, and there's a lot of watches out there now that do it. What is HRV, and how does it work, and how does it tell you about stress?
So HRV is heart rate variability.
Yeah.
Because unlike what most people maybe think, your heart's not beating at a really monotonous pace.
I know,
not just...
that's absolutely what everyone thinks. And I think it's because you get this da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. And also when you're doing CPR training, it's like that whole, do the staying, like, I don't know if people do that now because people probably don't know the Bee Gees, but, that staying alive,
yeah.
right? So staying alive has got a really...
Yes.
Quite a fast, but a solid beat. Like that beat
that's
is made
a
by a
specific
machine.
situation, which you definitely want that. you want the heart to rebeat.
Yeah, sorry. So when you're doing CPR, just stick with the staying alive.
Yeah,
but I think that whole the whole idea of a heartbeat, like in common speak, like the heartbeat is like the thing that just does absolutely regularly. That's how we think of it. We think of the rhythm of it. We think of, the heartbeat. If it's not doing an absolutely steady state, da-dum, 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 then we think something's wrong, right? That's when your heart's racing or your heart's stopped or it's skipped a beat. All of those are just metaphors for something has happened. That's like we think of the normal state as your heart being absolutely stable through your whole life. But that's not true.
Absolutely not.
It's mostly true, though. It's kind of, no.
It's
not even mostly true. Oh, my goodness, my life is shattered before my eyes.
You want some variability.
Right.
A healthy heart is a variable heart.
Right.
Not, there's an extreme level when it becomes arrhythmias or things that are out of whack.
Erratic.
Erratic is not good, but irregular within the confines of health is really good.
Yeah.
So your heart, you might have an average of, say, 70 beats a minute, but over that period of a minute, you're going to have some beats that are closer together and some beats that are further apart. And there are reasons for that.
I was just going to say, you could think of it like how you eat. Like you want a little bit of variability in what vegetables you have, but you want to always have some vegetables.
Exactly. There's definitely the variability. It's there for reasons. So one of the strongest reasons we have variability is because of the way we breathe. Because as you breathe in, your heartbeat changes, and as you breathe out, it changes as well. And it actually makes the system more efficient.
Wow.
So making sure that we adjust our heartbeats so that it's not pumping against extra resistance with our breathing. You know, we fill our chest, we make changes in the inside of our body. Our heart's working with that rather than against that.
That's very clever, isn't it?
And it makes it more efficient. If it's always trying to do the same thing when these other things are changing around it, it's going to keep more stress than it
because your
needs.
heart's stuck in your chest, in your
right
thorax
underneath
there,
your lung.
right underneath your lungs. And then as your chest cavity is expanding, the pressure around the heart must change.
Yeah, it does. Massively.
Wow,
So
that's
a
actually
huge,
quite clever. Because the heart, I guess, it's all about pumping fluid. So it's all about resistance and pressure.
Yep.
That's very clever.
Yeah, and if you change that and the pressure in your thorax from your breathing, then your heartbeat can change around that, which is really helpful. Whereas if it's the same and it's not responding to those, then it's an indication that maybe what we call our automatic nervous system is a little bit out of whack.
Yeah, because your heart's doing that without you thinking about it. It's just on autopilot, just doing it, and it's just somehow adjusting to your breathing as you're going in and out. Do you know how it does that? Like, how does it know what to do?
There'll be pressure changes, so it will be easier and then harder for it to beat, and it will be very responsive to those pressure changes. So it will be able to detect those pressure changes and then adapt accordingly.
Right.
We also up in our brainstem, which is our automatic control centre. So that's the bit that's sending out the signals to change our heartbeat or to change our breathing. Those interact right at that brainstem level, the respiratory
What
level.
they call the lizard brain. Is that right?
Your lizard brain, yeah. So that will have little nerves that will talk between the heart and the breathing centres to make sure that they're working in sync.
Wow, that's so clever.
It's very clever.
That is very clever. And I guess, like when you so that's your normal sort of state, but then when we're talking about anxiety, then we're talking about when you're measuring heart responses, but you're also measuring breathing, respiration responses. And when you've got those two things, you're just saying, well, they're actually really, really linked. So if you're suddenly breathing a lot
and changing it, or not letting that heart be variable because you've got that fight and flight response has just like ramped up the system, can't be as variable anymore. It can't react. It can't be as responsive. And so it puts more strain on the heart.
Right.
So this is what we see. You know, anxiety taps into this fight or flight response. Not always, not for everyone, but sometimes it can. So, but there are other things that can stress us too. Like, for instance, your watch will tell you when you're getting sick. You know, your heart rate variability will probably change before you start or when you're just starting. I'm not sure. Got a wee tickle. Not sure how, I've got
and then
this.
it goes.
And then you can see on your watch your heart rate variability will definitely go down. And then when you really spike, overnight, say if you've got a fever or whatever, you'll really see that heart rate variability change.
Right, and then it just crashes down.
Yeah. And so that's your stress response overriding some of those physiological adaptations that we have because it needs to. It's busy. It says, okay, we need to respond to this threat and then we can then recover later.
Right.
The thing with anxiety is that if you have tapped into that fight or flight response, it's prolonged anxiety, we're not giving it a chance to recover.
Right.
We're not giving it time to come back.
So when you're saying prolonged, is that like a week or is it a year?
It depends on the person. Right. So, and it depends, I think really it's about whether or not it goes away when that stressor is removed.
Right.
So if you've got a big thing coming up, you're going to probably have a period of being quite anxious,
Right.
A really big test, something that's really important for your life, that if you do it and you get through it, then something else, something amazing might happen. So you're going to be quite worried about that and you're going to be really doing those preparatory actions so that you can do that.
And that's when a little bit of anxiety is
it's
good.
Really helpful, exactly.
Right.
And so that might be over a prolonged period of time, depending on how long you've got and how much notice you've got,
That's end of year exams
exactly.
type thing.
But the key thing is that when that goes away, the anxiety goes away. That's when you're seeing that these anxiety responses are helpful and normal and you give your body a chance to recover.
Right.
What we see with clinical levels of anxiety is that response doesn't go away when the stressor is removed. It finds something else to be worried about.
Right, so it just rolls on to the next thing.
Yeah. And so
you get worried about the next thing.
So what we're really seeing now and what this next line of work that we're looking to go into is really understanding anxiety as a risk factor for these physiological conditions we have, such as cardiovascular disease.
Right. And I just read recently, there's been quite a lot of research coming out lately about modifiable risk modifiable risk factors for dementia. And I just read lately that maybe anxiety is a modifiable risk factor. And I guess that makes kind of sense with the whole head and body thing. But is that, she's nodding like crazy, yeah. So do we think that having like prolonged anxiety...
Yeah, you're stressing the system. You're making it work harder.
Right.
You're not giving it a chance to recover. You're tipping it into that, it's called the sympathetic nervous system, and our hormonal responses as well. Our endocrine system is all geared up to respond to this.
Right.
And you're making it work hard.
Right, and for a long time.
For a long time. Working hard is good for short periods, and then not too extreme. You want to stress the system so that it can adapt, but it can only adapt when it recovers.
Right. And that's like anything. That's like your muscles, right? If you do a bit of exercise, you have to do a little bit of exercise to keep your muscles working. Otherwise, everything just forgets that it's a muscle.
Exactly.
But if you do too much, then you wreck yourself.
Yeah. If you want to train for a marathon, you've got to implement that training regime.
Yeah.
You've got to have your big, long runs, but then you have to have the rest to recover.
Right.
Or you'll burn out and you'll get an injury or something and you won't make it to the start line.
That's interesting, isn't it?
Same thing. Stress can be really good, and actually stress is vital to keep us adapting to our environment. If we didn't stress ourselves in small ways, we didn't stress the system, then we wouldn't adapt. We wouldn't get, immunity to new diseases. We wouldn't be able to walk up that hill. We wouldn't be able to adapt. So stress is really important, but too much stress and for too long is not good.
Yeah, because it's another one of those words, isn't it? That stress seems like a bad word, but a little bit of stress at the right amount is important.
Vital, actually.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting how just in our society, we've taken some words that are kind of, actually in itself, it's kind of neutral. Stress and anxiety that you were saying before. It's a neutral word, but we've kind of shifted it to be like...
Only negative.
Yeah. But... it's all about having a little bit, having enough, and being able to control it.
Yeah.
I guess.
I think
one of the things... Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say the conflation often happens, in particular for anxiety, because we talk about anxiety and depression in the same sentence. And they're actually quite different things. They often happen together, but even their names are different. So anxiety is a core emotion, which can become dysfunctional and can become clinically significant.
Right.
The word depression is a clinical word.
Right.
So there's the subclinical core emotion underneath depression is sadness.
Right.
And sadness is a core emotion. It's really important for us. But the word depression is actually short for major depressive disorder. So we talk about them in the same way. We say anxiety and depression. And one of them is always clinically significant and one of them might not be.
Yeah, it's funny though, because even depressed... like we talk about that in a kind of layperson way. Oh, I've had a really bad day today, or my results come in from my exams and I'm really depressed about it all. But you're actually not.
Sad.
You're sad about it. So that's actually where kind of just using the word wrong.
Mm-hmm. Depressed is, you can use it out of a psychological context, and depressed means to be slowed. If you have something is depressed, then it's to be slowed. Yeah. So we've sort of adapted that version of it, but we've used it for its clinical connotations as well.
That's weird, isn't it? I think we should just stop using it in the non-clinical sense because it's too confusing.
It is, because it also means that it has these really negative connotations about it. It's okay to be sad about things. Yeah. It's really normal and important to be sad about things.
I mean, that's like with anxiety, right? Like if your dog dies, heaven forbid, close your ears, then you should be sad, right?
You should be. It's showing normal. You've got that emotion.
And it lets you process those emotions if you accept that that's a real emotion. Yeah. And if you don't, then you're building up just like problems for later.
Yeah, it's been really interesting, actually. I now work in psychology in Otago, and so I teach a lot of emotions and where they come from. And it's fascinating. In Western societies, the term emotion came out when psychology sort of became a discipline in the 1900s. And it comes from the very religious origins of things like urges, affections and sentiments. They were very biblical. And what happened is when psychology said we're moving away from religion, we don't want to be religiously related, we are going to define this new word of emotions. And it really only took the urges. It lost the affections and the sentiments, the more nuanced, the more cognitive aspects of it. And it became that emotions were urges, and emotions as urges should be suppressed because they are animal and primal and not something as higher beings that we should...
Isn't that strange? It's like they were trying to make it more secular, less religious, and yet they took all the morality of that religious thing and then just kind of lost all the rest of it.
And then we see that play out in Western cultures where we see emotions as something to be suppressed and not felt.
There's those really good books which are for kids. They're called something like...
Aroha's Way.
Yes.
They're fantastic.
And I think that tell us a little bit about those books.
I've not... I just have... very good clinical psychology colleagues who've recommended them, and I've got a little boy. So.
Yeah, and I think that they're there for teaching people the words for different emotions and trying to reclaim back some of that variety of emotions that we can have and say, okay, all of these emotions might be good.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing like good or bad about the emotions. They're just the emotions themselves. And then what you do, your behaviour and how that behaviour actually copes with those emotions. That's the thing that you can control. Emotions themselves are just a feeling.
Yeah. And they're really good for us. They tell us about what's happening in the environment. We experience something.
Yeah.
It's really important. The other, so Aroha's Way are fantastic books for all ages, not just children.
Yeah, I think so.
Incredible. And then the other one is actually Inside Out, the
movie. The movie.
And then Inside Out 2, and the way that it beautifully progresses from 5 of the sort of core emotions into puberty, and then things explode. And
there's lots of
way more.
I haven't actually seen that movie.
Oh, it's incredible. So, It's incredible.
Oh, well, see, recommendations here on the OI podcast. Oh, my goodness. I could talk to you all day, Olivia, and I'm sure you've got a whole heap more things to say at your talk in real life. Am I right?
Yes, lots to say.
Lots to say. Oh, it's going to be amazing. Hey, thank you so much for coming along. We have got a couple of minutes left. Have you got last thoughts? What haven't I asked you that's really important? Oh, sorry, no, you go.
So I think everyone always asks me, what can I do? If I'm really stressed.
What can I do? Yeah.
And there are, not as a clinical psychologist, I'm prefacing this, and not as a GP, but one of the simplest things we can do is breathe out slowly.
Breathe out, not breathe in, breathe out.
Breathe out slowly. What we often do is hold our breath, and that breathing out really slowly taps into that slow down part of our automatic nervous system. It says, we're fine, we're safe. So there's a fantastic saying from Tanya Clifton-Smith. She's a respiratory physiotherapist in Auckland, and she says, if in doubt, breathe out. So that's
if in doubt, breathe out.
If in doubt, breathe out. And it's just like your sigh, just like your body wants you to do. When you need a wee reset, if in doubt, breathe out. Fantastic. That's
a fantastic idea. I've got a sleep app, and it's really funny because sometimes you think, like, you're not holding your shoulders really, like, I guess that's like, I'm stressed, I'm holding my shoulders up really high. And sometimes you think you're not, but you are. Mm-hmm. And the sleep app actually says, okay, pull your shoulders up as high as you can, which is funny because you didn't realise that you had them really high to start with, and then push them down. And because it's telling you to do the thing that you're doing unconsciously, it's really interesting because then when you actually go to push them down, you go, oh, wow, they were actually really tight, high shoulders. And it's a little bit the same with the breathing. Like you may not have realised that you've just forgotten to breathe.
Yep. There's something called email apnea. We hold our breath when we wait for an
email.
Important email coming in.
Wow.
We'll often hold our breath.
That's interesting. I had a similar thing when going back to my watch, because a lot of doctors really don't like patients having these watches because they're like, oh my God, they're looking at their heartbeat and like their heart rate's going higher and higher and higher because then they're getting anxious about looking at their heart rate. Mm-hmm. And I said to the doctor, but it makes me really calm because if I can just watch the numbers and then I can just make my heart rate go down. And he totally didn't believe me. And he's like, yeah, that doesn't happen. I was like, no, watch. Look, it's really high now. And then I can just make, just by breathing.
Exactly. I was like, that's what you're doing. You're breathing.
And then I just breathe more, purposely, and it goes down. And he's like, yeah. But, I mean, that's kind of... how you think about the numbers, whether the numbers are making you more anxious.
Yeah, and I think there are... there's definitely a place for that feedback can be so helpful. If it freaks you out, just stop looking at it.
Stop looking at
Stop
it.
looking at it.
Yeah, see, and I think that's a general reaction that doctors have seen a lot. They see the numbers and then people freak out them. But I'm a numbers person, so I see the numbers and I go, oh, that's reassuring. I know where that is. I can just make that go down now.
Exactly.
I think that says more about me than the watch.
It can be really helpful. But that's, that's about listening. It's about what you need in that moment. That's about learning that right now looking at this is making me stressed, so I'm not going to do it. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to go do something else. I'm going to take a moment and go do something else. I'm going to cover that up. Whereas right now, maybe it's, that's empowering. I can change that. So I'm going to do that. So it's learning to listen to yourself in that moment and what you need.
And that's actually a really good point to finish on. And I guess that's like the takeaway for anxiety, and most of what your study is about figuring out how to help people listen to their body and figure out what they can do, what's the best thing for them to do. Wow, I'm so excited to see your talk. It's going to be fantastic. Thank you so much for coming along.
No problem.
Dr. Olivia Harrison. You've been listening to the OI podcast with Dr. Barb. If you enjoyed this episode with Dr. Olivia Harrison, we think you'll enjoy some of our other Royal Society Research Award interviews. Peter Heenan came in last June, and he will be giving a real-life seminar on the 27th of August, but you can catch up on his research from our interview last June. That's a whole year ago, I can't believe that. International Relations and Public Diplomacy, Professor Natalia Chaban came in and gave us a great research talk, and of course the Speaking for the Trees with Dr. Heenan. I've already said that. And next week, we've got Professor Geoghegan. And, of course, don't forget our In Real Life seminar, the Barclay Theatre, Tuhura, Otago Museum, from 4 till 6, Wednesday, the 25th of June. Ka kite. For the arts, sciences and Mataranga Māori.
You can support this podcast by becoming a member of the OI. Check out the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences on Facebook or our website.
If you'd like to listen again to this episode or others from the series, look for the OI podcast on ORFM's website, oar.org.nz.
Brought to you by the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences, the Otago branch of the Royal Society of New Zealand.
This podcast was produced by ORFM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.